Hello friends, welcome back to another lesson with Rivera Fine Art Studios. Today I'm going to do a continuation of a demo that I started about a month ago, and I had done a previous video on this where I just worked up the portrait of the baby using charcoal and white charcoal pencil on gray tone paper. Today what I'm going to do is actually add color over the baby. So I've worked up the background in full color, and now I'm going to add some color over the tonal depiction of the baby. So one thing that I want to mention is that I've sprayed the drawing with a workable fixative. So none of this is going to smear. I've sprayed this many times. So all of these values that I've laid down with the charcoal are now fixed to the paper. They're not going to smear, they're not going to blend. That step is very important because when I add color on top of this, I don't want the color to get dirty by mixing with the charcoal. And then the other thing I'd like to do is just talk about why I like doing these value tones underneath the color. So if we take a look at just some regular color, let's say I was working with my red pastel, we can see that's really a very bright saturated red. When we're working in flesh tones are really not high chroma colors, but rather low chroma, which means that a lot of reds and oranges we typically will see in a person's complexion, but we want to make sure that we don't make those colors too bright. So if I add this red over the gray, we can see it's much duller. So we can see right away that this is a lot lower in chroma than the red that I applied directly to the paper. And if I was to blend this a little bit, so if I just use a gloved finger, I can just push that down and knock it down a little bit lower. Okay, so I just want to talk for a moment about the colors that I'm going to be using. So I like to use pretty much earth tones, and maybe I will use a brighter red such as this, but this is basically a Naples yellow, a yellow ochre, a burnt sienna, and a Venetian red. And that is pretty much all I'm going to need to represent the flesh tones in this portrait. So typically what I will do is I will just lay down my color, and I do this semi-transparently, so I'm not really applying this in a heavy way. I'm letting some of those grays still show through. I want to really use that value structure to help guide the drawing. So the other thing that the value does is it helps to reveal the form or the light and the shadow. And that's pretty important. I want to make sure I don't lose sight of that what is light, what is dark, and then what is midtone. So I don't want to completely cover that. I'm just putting it over as sort of a veil. And then I can take my finger and blend it. So it's very important to have a glove on your hand when you're doing any blending with your finger, just because there's oils in your finger, and if they get deposited on the paper, they could leave a stain. So try to remember to always just have some plastic gloves like this that you can put right on your hand. And I have experimented with a lot of different blending tools for pastel, but I found that nothing really quite works as well as my finger. So sometimes I'll use a brush or even a tortillon, but your finger really, I feel like you have the most control. You can control the pressure, and it just really is fun to blend using your finger. So Feel free to experiment when you're using different blending tools, but I have always found my finger just works the best. So what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of looking for areas where I see some of this brown color, and this is my burnt sienna, so it's sort of between a brown and an orange, and I'm just blending with my finger to get rid of some of the graininess of the pastel and also to push the color into the tooth of the paper a little bit. So it's going to give me a slightly smoother display of these colors. But I'm also going to blend other colors into this. So the brown on its own is a little bit too brown. So I'm going to work other colors and layer into this base layer. So almost think of this as if you were painting this and you were starting off with a very limited palette. Essentially, that's what I'm doing right now with these thin veils of my burnt sienna. So now I'm taking another color. This is sort of a deep pink, a warm pink, almost an orange. And I'm adding that into the transition in the cheek between the shadow and the light. So this is kind of what I would think of as my mid-tone. And then I'm going to add a different color into my light areas. So I'm, again, paying very close attention to my initial value structure. I'm really letting that guide my colors now as I start adding these colors into the drawing. Okay, so now I'm moving on to my lights. So I've selected this very light flesh-colored pastel to just kind of throw in my general lights. And what's great about pastels is you can put it in kind of rough and then just blend it with your finger or whatever blending tool you choose to use. Pastel is very, very soft, so it's very easy to blend, and I really like it for that reason. So for me, I find there to be a lot of similarity between pastels and oil paints. The main difference is pastel is dry pigment, so the result is much more immediate. But I would really produce an oil painting in very much the same way that I'm doing for this pastel. So just as I would do in a painting, kind of saving the highlights for the end. So there's a couple of highlights on the nose, but I'm not going to really tackle that just at this moment because I want to just continue to fill in the color in the other parts of the face first. So now I'm ready to get into some of the deeper reds in the cheeks. Typically you'll see a lot of the really warm colors in areas like the cheeks or the nose, obviously in the lips. Sometimes you'll see warm colors around the eyes. But with this particular portrait, the baby has very rosy cheeks. So I'm going to save a high chroma color such as this cad red for an area like that, and I'm not going to really put that in too many places because I want those cheeks to really stand out. So if I was putting the red everywhere else, it just would, I wouldn't have that effect of the cheeks being rosy. So by itself, the red seems very, very strong, but again, if I just take my finger and I blend that into some of the other colors, I can slowly start to dull that down. So the thing with pastels is there's many layers and a lot of blending to get the effect. You can't really do it in one or two layers. You really have to work up the color in the drawing. So now what I could do is take a lighter pink and just kind of throw that on top of this red, because the red is still a little bit strong. Just throw that on top and let it blend into the red. It knocks down the chroma. So now it's just a little bit less extreme. Sometimes I will preload a tortillon to put smaller sections of color in. So right here I have a shadow that has a pretty hard edge on it. So I'm going to use my tortillon, which I've loaded up with the burnt sienna, and just lay color in that area. Again, my finger would just smudge that too much and it wouldn't be as much of a crisp edge. So now while I have this color on my tortillon, I'm just going to throw it into a few other places. So I have the crease of the cheek there, and then the nostrils are actually pretty warm. So I'm just continuing to lay that down using my tortillon. Okay, so I just want to zoom in as I continue to refine this drawing a little bit. But now I'm just going to move on to the right cheek. And again, I have a lot of warmth. So I'm using my cad red, and just as I did on the left cheek, I'm just going to throw that in to bring out the rosiness of that cheek. So once again, I've just preloaded my tortillon with a dark brown, and I'm just going over my shadow once again, the shadow on the side of the nose, with this darker brown color using the tortillon. And as the drawing develops, I'm just continuing to create more contrasts between my light and my shadows. So I always think about building the darks up slowly, as well as the lights in this case. But now I'm just going over that entire shadow once again with a darker color. So now I am adding one of my warmest colors in this portrait into the lips, and I'm using just the cadmium red once again, but I'm really putting it on pretty opaquely. And I'm using the tortillon here because this is such a small section. If I try to do this with the pastel, I really couldn't control where I'm putting it down quite as easily as I can with the tortillon. So I'm just kind of laying it in there and pushing it around, and really I'm able to sort of shape out the lips with the color by using the tortillon.